Star Wars 7x7, episode number 1781 today. More comments from Rian Johnson about his Star Wars trilogy, vague though they might be. However, there is an interesting tidbit or two that's worth chatting about. Let's go. Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode where we are going to talk about Rian Johnson's recent interview with The Observer about Knives Out, and because of course he, like other folks, is involved with Star Wars, you cannot be interviewed in Hollywood without being asked about Star Wars if you are otherwise so involved. So that's why we have any new comments about his trilogy right now. And, well, one of the things that's being raised as a question is his use of "we" in the interview and the suggestion that maybe it hints at possible involvement with David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the Game of Thrones guys, and that could certainly be an idea bolstered by the fact that around the time of Celebration, Kathleen Kennedy said that she was going to be sitting down with Benioff and Weiss and Rian Johnson in the planning of Star Wars movies for the next decade, what the direction's going to be. I'm not entirely sure that's the "we" that Rian Johnson was referring to, and I'm saying that as somebody who tends to say "we" a lot on this particular podcast, and actually just mean me, but even then, I don't think that Rian Johnson is meaning Benioff and Weiss, and so I'm going to tell you exactly who I think he's talking about in just a moment. First, though, I want to look back at a similar "we" comment about this upcoming series of movies. This is from one of the very first interviews that he gave where he talked about the possibility of doing something new. He said, "As we got to the end of episode 8, we had a great time working with Kathy and with Disney, and we kind of said, how can we keep this party going? How can we keep working together? And I kind of threw out there, like, the most interesting thing to me would be to tell a new story told over 3 movies where we go someplace else. And we go kind of the potential of like a wide open blue sky of let's go to a different part of the galaxy, maybe a different time. I don't know. Let's meet some new characters and let's figure out what Star Wars means, separated from some of the iconography that we've associated it with. Let's take it someplace else and see what that would be like." That just seemed like a really interesting question to ask. Alright, so there are a few "we's" in there, and I think the most likely answer is also the simplest and most straightforward one for who that other person is that's making him say "we," and I say that's Ram Bergman, his producing partner. That seems like the most likely and obvious conclusion in that regard. The person who would be working most closely with him, person who has worked with him on previous movies and did on The Last Jedi, did on Knives Out, very likely to be working on the new Star Wars movies with Rian as well. So if you consider the possibility that he's talking about Ram Bergman when he says "we," then that also makes this new interview with The Observer make sense as well. So here's what he had to say about the new Star Wars movies in this most recent interview. He said, "I think that the fun and challenging part of it is to dive in, figure out what's exciting, and then figure out what it's going to be. We're doing something that steps beyond the legacy characters. What does that look like? To me, the blue sky element of it is what was most striking about it. I know the way that I'm coming at it, and what's fun about it for everyone in Lucasfilm is figuring out what's the next step. It really makes you think and figure out what the essence of Star Wars is for me and what that will look like moving forward." Now, there are a couple of elements of those two interview quotes that are very similar to each other, which is remarkable considering that the interviews are spaced out by more than a year. One of them is the blue sky notion, the idea that anything could be possible, that they could go anywhere, anytime with this, except just not involved with the Skywalker saga or the legacy characters, actually. And the other aspect of it that is repeated is the essence of Star Wars, the notion that Star Wars has a particular essence, has a certain je ne sais quoi about it, if you will, and that you can figure out what that is and create a movie like that that does not involve characters with which we're already familiar. And to that point, I think right now, as far as the things that are being produced as Star Wars stories go, there's only really one other story at this point that seems like it is pursuing the essence of Star Wars without including any of the legacy characters. In other words, that it is pursuing kind of the vision that Rian Johnson is talking about. And that would be The Mandalorian, which is, of course, the live-action series being produced for the launch of Disney Plus and spearheaded by Jon Favreau. You can't make the case that Rogue One doesn't trade on Star Wars legacy, because of course it's tied to a very seminal moment in Star Wars legacy, the theft of the Death Star plans, and it includes a host of legacy characters, including Darth Vader, Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, a brief cameo from Leia, Governor Tarkin, etc., etc. So yeah, you can't do that. And Solo obviously also trades on legacy stuff as well. The Cassian Andor series, well, it's going to trade on Rogue One, so by extension still kind of plays in that space, even if it turns out legacy characters, if you want to define legacy characters as characters appearing in the saga movies, right, then maybe it doesn't trade on it in that same way, but I think really The Mandalorian is the purest version we're getting of that, at least until we get Rian Johnson's trilogy. And then, of course, that raises the question of what's going on with Benioff and Weiss, which I will answer after the break. And that's another reason why I think The Mandalorian is so crucial to Disney's success going forward, because it isn't just the continuation of Star Wars storytelling, it's the continuation of telling stories in the universe without the legacy characters. And that, I think, is going to be vital to the success of Disney and Lucasfilm going forward, because they can only trade on that for so long. You know, it's just not going to be possible to do that indefinitely. All right, Benioff and Weiss after the break. Stay tuned. This episode is brought to you by Constant Contact, the premier email marketing solution for small businesses and organizations. I've used their service since 2003, and over the past decade and a half, I've watched them evolve, make the product simpler, more powerful, easy to use, and do everything that they can to help train people to use the product more effectively and for it to work with other forms of marketing like social media, for example. So check out sw7x7.com/email to learn more about Constant Contact and start a free trial. Once again, that is sw7x7.com/email for a free trial. Welcome back. So Benioff and Weiss, they got their big deal. 5 years, $250 million from Netflix. Must be nice. And apparently it is going to affect their Star Wars situation to some degree. This is from The Hollywood Reporter citing unnamed sources, so you know how that goes. Apparently they were supposed to be writing all 3 of their Star Wars trilogy movies. Yes, it's a trilogy, again, not a series, a trilogy. And now, in light of the Netflix deal, they will be writing one of the movies, and as for the other 2, just don't know. But they are writing a treatment for the entire trilogy that will be done under their auspices. And naturally, Netflix was familiar with the situation and had no problem with it, according to a source familiar with the deal. So there you go. Still on track for 2022 with Benioff and Weiss. And that is going to do it for your update on these upcoming Star Wars movies and for this show, too. Thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
This podcast is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox. It is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other related Star Wars items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2019 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.